There's a good percentage of scrapes that you're going to see that mainly get nighttime activity, but it's all about the location of the scrape. I mean, there are scrapes that I know of, many that I get 90% daytime pictures. I think when a lot of people think of a scrape, they think of that scrape along a field edge or the edge of a food plot or a cornfield or in some high traffic feeding area where that's just simply where deer are spending most of the nighttime hours. A lot of those hunters don't know of these scrapes on the fringes of these bedding areas that bucks are hitting almost every day during daytime hours. They're harder to find, but if you can find the right scrape, I think you're going to find that scrapes are, once again, an ultimate key or tool for hunters to be using.
All right, Steve Sherk, man. Glad to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for doing another episode with us.
Hey, I could go all day with you guys, so don't even have to thank me. Thanks for having me, though.
So we had you on talking about preseason scouting, early season prep. People can go back and watch that one if they want. We'll link it down in the show notes. But right now, we want to get into the nitty-gritty. We want to go as far down the rabbit hole as we possibly can about scrape hunting, rut hunting, just the actual hunting part. So again, just a quick refresher. You have Sherk's Guide Service up here in Pennsylvania. Give me just a quick rundown of what that is.
Yeah, it's just a guide business I have that I specifically run by myself. It's rut hunts, rut archery, gun hunts, and usually our gun season's usually the first Saturday after Thanksgiving for a couple weeks. It's all public land, so if it's something you're interested in, definitely, I'm sure by the end of the podcast, we'll put my link in there and they can contact me.
You know, we kind of touched on this in the first episode. We breezed by it, but I am just curious on the front end of this. Do you have issues with people like trying to follow you around and find your spots and everything like that?
You know, I maybe a little bit, not a whole lot, and I'm very, and I don't know if it's based on the area that I'm in, because I've heard all kinds of horror stories, you know, about hunters and different public lands throughout the country, but it really doesn't seem like people want to follow me. I think they have followed the way I do things in certain occasions, but fortunately. But another thing too, I will say, is I think a lot of people also know, especially locals, that like things change here from year to year. So, and I'm all over the place anyway. I'd be a tough guy to follow. So fortunately, fortunately, I don't think it's very minimal, which I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, we know multiple guys in Alabama who have like a secret truck that they keep in their shed or whatever. They only drive when they go hunting, that they try to like not let people know that they own that truck.
Yep. I am the same way. I have a vehicle that if people knew that I drove that hunting, they would literally make jokes about it. So I think that also helps.
Yeah, man, you got to be incognito every once in a while.
Yeah.
But so to kick things off, we talked a little bit last time about summertime scrapes. And one of the things I was most excited about talking to you about is scrapes. I love scrapes. I love hunting scrapes. I love putting cameras on scrapes. I like finding scrapes. They're just one of my favorite things ever in the deer woods. So, and I know that you're big into them as well. So just give me a quick rundown on your philosophy around scrapes and hunting around scrapes.
Yeah, I mean, scrapes are a huge tool for me. I know we talked a lot even about them for scouting, preseason inventory, all that. You know, for me, a scrape, it's like the ultimate factor and way to get as much intel in a certain area than anything else. Like, you know, you can be on trails, you can even set cameras up on food sources and, you know, get an idea how many deer in that area. But it seems like there's certain scrapes that I honestly feel that any buck within a few miles will eventually come to that scrape, especially if they've had some history and they know of that specific scrape. It's just amazing the amount of different bucks you can get on scrapes. And it's always something that I feel, I said it in the last podcast too. I don't think there's ever a day that a buck isn't interested in a scrape. Maybe he doesn't work it physically, but he at least will check it out as he goes by. So it's really the ultimate tool or location for hunters to take advantage of, whether you're using trail cameras or even hunting. Like, I don't know if there's a better way or if there's anything better out there to take advantage of.
Yeah. I did this on the last one. I'm going to keep doing it on this one, but tying it back to our experiences in Alabama, years ago, me and a buddy of mine put some cameras out on a piece of public land in South Alabama, and we found a couple big scrapes, and we left cameras on them from probably late October. Our bow season opens October 15th. The rut in this area is mid-January. We left them out there until turkey season, and then we went and picked them up. And we went through and we looked at every single buck that came by those cameras. And there was one scrape in particular where, not talking spikes or anything, but racked bucks. There was 27 different racked bucks that came by this scrape during the season. And it just blew our minds because we're like, I don't even know there's that many racked bucks running around out there, in that one general area. And I still can't kill any of them, but that's beside the point. A lot of people will look at scrapes as a way to maybe buck inventory, like what I'm talking about, but you like actually hunting around the scrapes, and you'll hear people be like, oh, it's only nighttime activity.
Yep.
Just again, right here off the top, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say there's a good percentage of scrapes that you're going to see that mainly get nighttime activity, but it's all about the location of the scrape. I mean, there are scrapes that I know of, many that I get 90% daytime pictures versus nighttime pictures. And I think when a lot of people think of a scrape, they think of that scrape along a field edge or the edge of a food plot or a cornfield or in some high traffic feeding area where that's just simply where deer are spending most of the nighttime hours. And you're going to find way more scrapes in those areas, and you're going to start to think that, like, well, that just must be where scrapes are generally located, around feeding areas or these highly concentrated areas. But like, a lot of those hunters don't know of these scrapes on the fringes of these bedding areas that bucks are hitting almost every day during daytime hours. They're harder to find, but if you can find the right scrape, and if you can start to discern, is that a scrape that has potential, or is that the type that I shouldn't be hunting? Like, if you can start to get a feel for making that decision, I think you're going to find that scrapes are, once again, an ultimate key or tool for hunters to be using.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about scrapes, especially for guys like us three that hunt public land, is we don't have access. You can't bait, especially all the places that we hunt. Some states allow minerals and stuff like that, but you can't bait, which for a lot of people on private land, if they can bait, is a prime spot. They can put a camera, they can get inventory of all kinds of stuff at different times of day and night. For guys on public land, it is the one thing you can put a camera on that you can get deer coming from all different directions, all different areas, if it's in the right location, and get tons of inventory in season, before season, and so on, in a spot where you can kind of really figure out what's in the area and how they're using it. And you're saying that there's some scrapes that lend themselves better for daylight activity. I think that's the one thing everybody's trying to find. Yeah. What is the scrape I can put a camera on that has daylight activity? You mentioned they're around bedding areas specifically. Yeah. One thing that we haven't mentioned quite yet in this episode, you're hunting big woods, big expanses of timber up here in Pennsylvania, no ag, not really any open ground outside of like clear cutting activity, which is very similar to a lot of stuff we hunt back south. So there's a lot of similarities there. Can you talk about what do some of these bedding areas look like kind of later in the season, especially when you're talking October, November? What do they look like around here? Where do you kind of typically find them? And then we'll go into positioning of where you may find scrapes, because probably not every bedding area is going to have a scrape next to it.
Oh, yeah. And as far as locating bedding areas, I especially find most bedding areas just in thicker pockets of cover. And we talked a little bit about clear cuts before. Obviously, clear cuts are great for bedding areas, but I go even beyond that. Like, sometimes it's just like, I don't know if you guys have it down south, but we have a lot of what they call beach brush. It's this just thick, nasty understory type stuff, and it holds leaves. It will hold its leaves sometimes well into the winter, and like that makes for like some of the best bedding habitat. And I usually just start with finding thicker cover and higher elevations, because most of our bedding is up high. And then when I do find, beds within the cover or signs of bedding activity, to find the scrapes, I usually just start walking the perimeters, the transition of the cover between the open woods. And like I've said, maybe when we just had regular conversations, I sometimes will walk the entire perimeter of a thicket and maybe I find one scrape. But to me, that one scrape is probably going to be better than any scrape I find within any feeding activity or feeding areas within that general area. Like, for instance, when you have scrapes around bedding versus feeding, it literally boils down to, when we're talking mature deer especially, where are mature deer generally more throughout daytime hours? Around bedding area. So that's where you need to be. A lot of their feeding is at night. A lot of the sign they throw down is at night. So I always tell myself this too. Generally, a lot of times when you're finding boatloads of buck sign, there's a good chance there's quite a bit of night activity there. You might be a mile off from where that deer spends his daytime hours. So those scrapes, once again, the good ones are usually harder to find. But when you start to be able to locate bedding areas and you start to get a feel for where they set up these scrapes, those, I'm telling you, are going to be the scrapes you're going to get more daytime pictures than nighttime pictures, or have more daytime encounters while you're in the tree stand.
And I'm glad we're talking about, again, locating these scrapes around these bedding areas, these thickets, areas where you have a concentration of buck activity in and around that cover, because we've all seen this. I know you have, especially you're in a lot more deciduous forest up here, a lot more hardwoods outside of the hemlocks. Where we're at, it's a lot of pine trees, but there's still areas with oaks. A lot of times the bottoms where they haven't clear cuts where your oaks are at. But even when those big bottoms is wide open, you'll find tons of scrapes, especially when the oaks start dropping. We've had interviews in the past, earlier this summer, where guys were talking about those situations where you'll find that sign and you hunt it and you don't see anything, because that's either where they were previously at a few weeks ago, right when season opened up and you didn't have opportunity to hunt it, or they're just not getting there before dark. So that's kind of the struggle there, versus finding those scrapes in around that bedding cover could be such a bigger factor. The one thing I would want to ask is for guys getting into, coming into October, getting ready for November, if they have scrapes in mind of where they've seen some of these scrapes, maybe around thick cover, which ones would you lend more value to? Is it one that's just isolated next to one patch of cover, or one that's in between a couple different patches of cover? I don't know if you run into that situation very often.
I do. What I generally find is you usually have a fairly active deer trail kind of on that transition of the thicker cover and the open woods. It's generally also just natural for deer to work through those areas. But I also, especially, this is more of a theory, but I have a lot of belief in it, that mature bucks, especially once we get, into the hunting season, they want to be isolated in their bedding areas. They want to claim a bedding area often. And that's kind of like the neutral zone. That transition is a neutral zone between, to me, his bedding area is more important to him than anything else. The security, owning that area, like he wants to claim the rights to that area. And then you have like this, you start to run into where other deer are moving around the fringes of that bedding area. And then when you find that scrape there, it's a gold mine, because that's where he's checking for other intruders. That's where he's socializing with other deer. Even though, like, we know for a given fact that it's very often for nighttime hours, a mature buck to go into a feeding area with deer of all age classes. Deer, bucks, does, fawns, they'll feed together. But when it comes to bedding, there's that separation. And that's where, like I said, if you can find that scrape, on the fringes of that bedding, And you want other deer to be interacting, because that's going to pique his interest to check that scrape more often. If he's the only one ever going to that scrape, it doesn't mean as much to him. So when you can find that neutral zone where other deer are communicating with him on the fringes of that bedding area, I'm telling you, it's a heck of a spot.
Is a lot of times these scrapes, when you find them close to a bedding area, are they like right on the edge, or do you see them 25 to 50 yards away from the edge? Do you see any differences there of how close that scrape could be to that cover?
I honestly usually just find it on the natural deer trail going through that transition. Now, sometimes what happens is there could be a terrain feature where the trail was following the edge of the cover, but then it runs into some boulders or some logs, and then you'll see the trail shoot out 20 yards around it. But generally, the deer want to be close to that cover, even though, a younger buck might already know that I'm not going in there to bed. But yet again, if I see another human, I'm running in there. I'd rather get my butt kicked by that 5-year-old than run into another hunter. Like, they still feel more safe than with another buck than other humans. But my point is, I think the key is to find that trail. That there's almost always a trail around the edge of that bedding area, around that cover, because it's a transition area. And then I will also say too, sometimes you hit an even bigger jackpot. You'll be following that outer trail, but then you'll notice another trail coming out of the bedding area, and where those two trails meet, you'll find a big scrape, and that can be a heck of a spot to hunt too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, do you notice, you're talking about a lot of these bedding areas you're trying to focus on for these mature bucks, a little bit higher up in elevation. Again, we're talking more mountainous country here.
Yep.
Are you finding those scrapes on the top side or the bottom side of that cover?
Probably more on the bottom side, because I tend to find that they're accessing it from the bottom and then they're leaving from the bottom end, just for the fact that bucks naturally in the mountains will follow the thermals, and they'll transition down into the valleys during the nighttime hours. So I'm more excited when I find that scrape in the bottom, on the bottom edge versus the upper edge, for sure.
Interesting. I want to jump back real quick to something that you mentioned about finding that nighttime versus daytime sign. That's a really common question that we get, because a lot of guests mention that. They'll say, oh, that's night sign, or this is probably daylight sign. And a lot of people hear that and they're like, how can you tell just by looking at it? It sounded like what you said was, when you find a high concentration of sign all in one area, that's probably going to be your nighttime sign, and vice versa. If you find isolated sign by itself, that's going to be daytime. Is that correct?
Yes and no. Like, I also factor in, okay, what's the hunting pressure like in this area? How far off the beaten path are we? Because there are areas where I'll find some, even in a feeding area, like if it's very remote, you can catch some daytime activity in there. But generally, when I see a lot of sign, I don't get as excited as what other hunters do. Some of my best spots, there's hardly been a rub or maybe one scrape, and it's just amazing the amount of daytime activity you'll get. Usually where you have a lot of sign, it's due to an abundance of deer coming together in one area. Sometimes people will think like, wow, there was 30 rubs on that ridge. That buck must have been rubbing all night. No, there's 5 or 6 bucks coming in there every night feeding on acorns. Like, they're interacting with each other. They're aggressive. They're throwing rubs down because they're trying to fight over territory, or there might be does in the area that they're competing for. So generally that's what happens, but I don't want to tell people to just completely overlook it. I think you have to start questioning and looking into it a little bit deeper. Like, okay, is there some sense to pointing more towards night activity based on how accessible it is, or what are the chances of, is this closer to a bedding area, or things like that. Like, you have to look deeper into it and then just say lots of sign, has to be night activity. There's definitely more into it, making that decision.
But it sounds like you can also look at the environment that scrape is in, and if you find that scrape and you're like, man, here I am on this big oak flat, and there's no cover around. Like, I can see 100 yards off through the woods. The closest good thickets, a couple hundred yards away, down in a valley or something, or on the next ridge. You could take that information and say, okay, this is a feeding area. It's not, again, a lot of conventional deer hunting media. It would be like, oh, the feeding area would be like, you think a food plot, a cornfield, a feeder, whatever. It's not that. This is in the big woods, so it's not quite as black and white as that. But you can draw that distinction and say, okay, because I'm in a feeding area, this maybe isn't the scrape that I should be really focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if I was to get excited over, hunting scrapes, especially during the peak scrape period, I'm looking for those best scrapes. I'm not particularly looking for the area with the most scrapes or the most sign or focusing a ton around feed. I'm always thinking, on a given day, given situation, what is my best chance of catching a buck at a scrape, during daytime hours? And like I said, a lot of times I think people would be surprised if I showed them some of the scrapes that I've had success on over the years. Like, they'd just be like, wow, there's no rubs, there's not many trails, but there's a scrape here. And I'm like, that's the one. It's amazing.
Just a little anecdote on that, and then Jacob's gonna ask a question. I had a spot a couple years ago I shot a buck on in Alabama, big wood setting, and it set up kind of like what you're talking about. There was a flat coming off of this ridge, just like a big ridge system, and about on the bottom third there was a nice flat that dropped off. And the front face of that flat, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It would almost be like, this is not a great analogy, but I'm gonna roll with it. Like if you looked at the hood and windshield of a car, right? The windshield or the hood would be the flat. The windshield going up is the ridge face, and then the top of the car is the top of the ridge, like the tallest part of the ridge. The windshield is thick. The flat, the hood of the car, was open, and then the grill of the car going off, it dropped off pretty steep right there, and that was thick as well. But on that flat, there was one, magnum scrape, huge scrape, about the size, bigger than a car, actually about the size of a Toyota Camry. It is a ginormous scrape. And all the buck sign in that area was probably the closest high concentration of buck signs, maybe about 150 yards away, kind of rolling off the edges of that flat, going down in these little creek drainages. Dude, you walk down there and there would be like, I'm not kidding you, you'd walk and find hundreds of scrapes and rubs. Buck sign everywhere. Yeah. But that camera that I had on the big scrape that was all by itself was just lit up with daylight activity. Yep. And I ended up hunting it and actually killed a buck, not coming to the scrape. He was swinging about 75 yards above the scrape in the afternoon. And that spot worked out for me. But that's just an example of kind of like what you're talking about, I think, is, a couple of years ago, I would have definitely been hunting down where all that sign was. But I had cameras in there, and they just weren't picking up a lot of daytime activity like that big community scrape was that we found. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because, again, Southern audience, a lot of people will be like, well, he's in Pennsylvania, like this is the South. But I just wanted to throw it out there because I've had this work for me in Alabama, several times. But anyways, what was your question? One thing we talk about with almost every guest on this show is map scouting. My favorite map scouting tool is LiDAR. If you're unfamiliar, LiDAR is basically like a 3D scan of the Earth's surface. I like to say it kind of takes away all the surprises. LiDAR is now available on OnX Hunt on their topography map. If you go to your app right now, click on the topography map, you can flip on that LiDAR feature and boom, it's going to come on and you're going to see what I'm talking about. The LiDAR is going to allow you to see things that are normally hidden from view. This might be ditches, bends in creeks, rocks, old road beds. I personally love old road beds because deer like to walk them. They're great places to find scrapes. They're great camera locations. And before, an old roadbed or an old logging road might be something that you kind of happen upon while you're out scouting or hunting. Well, now with the LiDAR, before I go into an area, I can turn on that LiDAR and I can see exactly where those roadbeds are. Even old logging roads from the 1930s, you can still see them on there. So that allows me to go straight to those spots and check them out. It's just an incredibly helpful tool, and it's available now on OnX Hunt. And hey, if you want to get 20% off your OnX Elite membership, you can use the promo code SOUTHERN. Like I said, it's going to save you 20%. Go check out that LiDAR feature. You'll be glad you did. Know where you stand with OnX Hunt.
There's more of you guys getting into saddle hunting than ever before, and a common question we always get is how do you get comfortable in a saddle? Because there's so many moving parts. And today I'm gonna give you 3 of the best tips that I have for getting comfortable in the saddle after doing this for about 8.5 years. Number 1 is tether height. Setting your tether at the right height is going to give you extreme comfort, but this is one big reason why you need to practice with it. I like mine right at nose level when I'm standing on the platform. The other is your bridge length. Having an adjustable bridge on your saddle makes it extremely comfortable to fine tune that comfort, and I like mine extended out almost all the way. The third is how you sit in your saddle. Some people like the saddle sitting just below the belt line, which I've done in some saddles in the past. That made it more comfortable. Some are right at the belt line, and some are a little bit above the belt line. Now, having a very comfortable saddle makes it really easy to do all this stuff with less adjustment. And the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors is that saddle for me personally. I really like this saddle, and I really like the hip pinch reduction system that's built into the saddle that gives me a lot more comfort all day long with less adjustments needed. If you want to check out the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors, you can go to latitudeoutdoors.com for more information.
You know, more big bucks probably get killed on clear cuts than anything else, especially when it comes to hunting in the Southeast. And back behind me, I've got a really good example of what makes a good spot in a clear cut. So there's 2 main ingredients you want to look for. You want to look for low spots, and you want to look for habitat diversity. Right here behind me, I've got both of those. We've got this more fresh cut. It's just got some grasses and some saplings in it, but enough that a deer's probably going to feel hidden in it. They're going to want to be in it. And then this hill rolls off, and back behind me over here, we've got a pine thicket. And right there in that lowest spot, this clear cut meets that pine thicket, which is perfect. So I've got my 2 key ingredients meeting right in the same spot. That's how I can look at this clear cut that's over 100 acres, and I can narrow it down to the spot within the spot. Now, one challenging thing about hunting these spots that you got to watch out for is you could have a deer pop out at 50 yards, but you could also have one pop out at 450. For that reason, I like carrying a pair of range-finding binoculars. These are the brand new Ranger 3000s from Vortex. They've got great glass. They've got a great price point. They're thin and they're lightweight. They fit my bino harness just perfect. The reason I like carrying a pair of range-finding binoculars is so I don't have to fumble with 2 separate objects, like get my binos up, see at the shooter, and then try to get the rangefinder out. I can do all that at the same time with these, which is going to save me valuable seconds. And if you've hunted something like this, you know that a few seconds can literally completely make or break your hunt. So if you want to check out the Ranger HD 3000s from Vortex, go to eurooptic.com, use the promo code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on these binoculars or any other optics from Vortex. So y'all go to eurooptic.com, use that code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on any Vortex products.
Over the years, we've interviewed quite a few successful ground hunters when it comes to bow hunting, and the commonalities between all of them is using the shadows to their advantage. Having overhead cover, back cover, and a little bit of front cover that adds a little bit more shadows to their setup, which allows them to hide a lot easier. That's what we've done today, and built this brush blind for Andrew to come in here with his recurve and shoot some does, hopefully early season when these white oaks behind the camera are going to be dropping. One important thing about blending in the shadows is having something that works camel wise in the shadows, and that's one thing I like about this mossy oak woodsman leaf jacket is it's a little bit darker in color, and to me blends in a little bit better to the shadows during early season when you have full leaves on those trees. This is something I'm going to keep in my backpack all season because it's really compact, it's really lightweight, and breathes really well, and I really won't need it until I need it, but it's going to be in my backpack the whole time, which is really nice because of how compact it is. So if you're interested in ground hunting a little bit this year or having extra concealment up in the tree, check out the Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket at mossyoak.com. Totally got me distracted, but that's a good spot because yeah, it's like sandwiched in between thick cover bedding, and does are using both sides of where that scrape's at, and there's a thick transition line cutting across that flat as well. That there's a ton of activity. The one thing I wanted to ask on is bedding areas, again, associated with these scrapes. How big are some of these bedding areas, or how small are some of these bedding areas that you're finding the scraping activity around?
Yeah, and that can vary. I mean, I've found bedding areas half acre to an acre. I do think if I was to say, like, is there a preference in size? I do think, especially mature bucks like some room to roam around in there throughout the day. I don't think if they're using it for wind or thermals or visual, like, I don't think they're always comfortable as the day progresses to want to be bedded in a small, tight area. I'm not saying that they in situations don't, but I think they like bigger bedding areas where they got a lot of cover. I think they like bedding areas where there's topography changes, some shelves, some higher elevations, some points. Like the more you throw all that in together, and especially with good food within that bedding area, I think that just becomes the perfect world for a mature buck to bed in. And then when you start to take away those things, the size or the food or topographical features, you name it, then, I also want to point out that I've definitely learned this over the years, and I've seen countless bucks do it. Like, I'm still a big believer that the most dominant buck in that area gets the best bedding. I've seen it take play many, many times. Like, it's no different than, you can go get a hotel room and do you want the one with the window and the deck, or do you want to take that one there's no windows and down in the bottom and you hear all the noise? Like that mature deer, he's going to get the best of the best, and it's more about his security and making his life easier than anything else. But they do get the cream of the crop within the herd in that general area, and that's what's another nice key about bedding is, like, there's consistency to it also. Like, especially some of these bedding areas, for at least a lot of times 4, 5, 6 years in a row, you can count on them being consistent and going back to them each year. And it makes the game a lot easier when you can narrow things down that quickly.
So also, with you running trail cameras on these scrapes next to these bedding areas, how often are you getting one of these mature bucks on camera typically? Like, is he in there most of the days during the week, or is he there for a couple days and he's gone for a few days and he's back again? What kind of patterns have you seen on different bucks in those kind of spots?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I mean, a lot of it just depends on the diversity in the area. Like, there's some areas where I'll find a buck sometimes bedding on 3 different ridges within a mile stretch. But then sometimes, once again, there's that most perfect world where he's just got everything going for him in that 6-8 acre thicket or whatever, where he just has no reason to leave. Maybe water's not that far. A lot of these spots are so thick, nobody wants to go in there anyway. It's like a jungle. So it just really depends on how good and diverse that area is. And I think the less diverse the habitat in that general area, the more sporadic and inconsistent the bedding will be.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. The reason I bring it up is we've done some podcasts with Dr. Bronson Strickland from Mississippi State University on some buck bedding studies that he's done in more flat land, gentle rolling hill country. Mm-hmm. And one thing they came up with is, like, a buck would rarely ever use the same bedding site, like individual bedding site, which they would say is a 20-yard wide area.
Yeah.
Like, rarely he'd use it more than one day in a row, and sometimes he would never come back to it. It was like a bedding area that might have been 40 acres in size, a big thicket, and he's bouncing around all in that thing, and then transitioned over here, 200 yards away to another bedding thicket that's a big area, and he's constantly using different bed sites in that one thicket, which makes it super hard to hunt because he's not going back to the same exact little spot every single time. He's somewhere in front of me within, maybe 200 yards, but I don't know if he's on this side. I don't know if he's closer to me on the back side of it, where. And that's one thing. We still haven't gotten that detailed data for mountain hunting, but I feel like it'd be probably some of the similar situation, especially in the areas with less diverse habitat, food, and cover.
Yep. So. Yeah, and that's exactly another reason why I like finding scrapes or the scrape around the fringes of that bedding area, because that buck may bed in different portions of that thicket throughout a week's period or a few days period, but he's going to go to that scrape more often than what you think. I'm not saying every day, because rarely have I, and I don't even know if I've ever seen it where literally every day that buck checked that scrape. But out of a week's period, it is very common I'll get a buck and a mature buck on a scrape 3-4 times a week within the fringes of a bedding area. And you throw in the odds, like finding a location in the big woods to really get in and maybe peg a big buck. If you're getting pictures of a deer 3 or 4 days a week consistently in one spot, that's about as good as you can get in the big woods. So that's why I think it's, especially early season, or right before the rut, like that's about as deadly of a setup as I've ever found. Honestly, that would be my go-to. Yep.
So with scrapes, I want to ask a little bit more of your trail cam strategy in season around scrapes. Is it one of those things that when you find that right scrape, what you have a gut feeling and maybe even past history with, that camera's going to sit there forever? Or do you ever move around to different scrapes on different bedding areas? Because I know you run a lot of cameras, but like, what is your strategy there with camera placement on those scrapes and around those bedding thickets?
Like, are you saying from year to year or throughout the season?
Throughout the season, really.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's, that's just hunting. Like, I have spots that for no rhyme or reason, like last year, a big deer was bedded in, and maybe even early part of the season, a buck was there, and then sometimes things just drastically change and I don't figure it out, but I bounce around a ton. And that goes for any time of the year. As much as I work hard to try to pre-plan and predict everything out, I'm telling you, and I think most hunters have to admit, like, it's a day-to-day process out there. Sometimes it's throughout the day you're making adjustments. There's times where, I'll be honest, where I start to give myself a little bit too much credit and confidence, like, wow, I'm predicting everything. Like, I got this figured out, but then eventually you get humbled. So certainly throughout the season, and even when it comes to bedding and hunting different spots, but that's one thing I love about, and maybe I'm getting too far ahead, but I do love cell cameras, especially around bedding areas. I hate to go into a bedding area, even the fringes, and have to check a camera, because that deer, his security there is more important than anything else. So if I can just stay back and monitor, especially if it's a scrape on the edge of that bedding area, and I can just wait for the right intel or the right moment and then slip in, like, it's an extremely deadly method to hunt. But then again, there's been times, and it's just hunting where it's not as consistent as what we'd like it to be, and I end up moving around way more than what I expected.
Yeah. So one thing with scrapes that I think throws people off, I think everybody's guilty of it, is looking at location of a scrape versus the size of a scrape. And always saying the bigger scrape's always the better one. Mm-hmm. I think in any circumstance, kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier with, if it's closer to a feeding area, maybe it's just getting a lot of activity and it's a lot of like nighttime activity. So, it looks huge, but doesn't necessarily mean something that's worth hunting. Might be okay for getting inventory, but I don't know how much is going to help you depending on how late those deer are getting there.
Yep.
When it comes, do you pay any attention to the scrapes around a bedding area to the size of the scrape, or if you just find a good scrape that looks like it has multiple years of history, it's worth something that you'll put a camera on or check it out?
The only time I really get concerned about the size is if there's multiple scrapes. There are times where, given the right location, there's a lot of deer traffic going around the fringes of that bedding area, and you might, there's been times I've found a pile of scrapes or a long scrape line, and then I'm starting to think, okay, what look like the more active scrapes? Or another thing I'll do is start looking to see, are there trails coming out and into the bedding area to these scrapes? That would be a factor too, because once again, I think sometimes there's a situation where a buck will bed in a spot in that cover with the mindset, as soon as I leave, the first thing I'm doing is I'm hitting that scrape. And he might set up on that bed with the trail that goes right to the scrape. That might be, it might be, for instance, early season, it gets dark, 6:45, 7 o'clock, and he might be like, it's 6 o'clock, I'm just going to lay at this bed till about 6:30, and then I'm going to work my right out, hit that scrape, and move on. Like, that would be stuff that I pay attention to. And once again, sometimes I do find a good number of scrapes around the fringes of that bedding area. But one thing I will say is, a lot of times it's literally just on that trail, that route that deer are using along the transition. Once you get off that trail, you don't find hardly any sign. And that gives me a comforting feeling, because that tells me that everything is secure, tight to this cover.
Oh, okay. Now, also, what have you seen over years, especially around cameras, certain conditions that affect scraping activity in some of those locations?
Yeah. And one right off the bat, some people might be surprised, is if we get warm weather, and we're talking more, pre-rut through the rut, I generally see even less scraping activity. I think the warm, hot weather will even affect the rutting mood. I mean, don't get me wrong, the mood is there, but especially these northern deer, they want those colder temperatures. And like, what's amazing is, even like, say, like early October, you'll start to see more and more scrapes, but generally it's pretty warm. All of a sudden you get a cold front and there are scrapes everywhere. The day after that front ends, you go through and do some scouting, and you were just in the woods right before that front came through, and you see 5 times more scrapes. And that's because that cold snap just gets those bucks in the mood. I know there's people out there that would totally disagree with the fact that with me thinking that like temperature even affects the mood, but there's no doubt it does. And then secondly too, and this is one that I think a lot of other hunters would agree on, but anytime you have an end of precipitation, rain or snow, I always see them working scrapes. And then the last thing I find too that gets pretty heavy is if you're getting a pretty heavy leaf fall and where scrapes are getting covered up, and that's a scrape that buck is really trying to interact with other deer, he does not want leaves in that scrape because he needs the bare dirt to be holding that scent. And I also think that like he's trying to pod out just so every other deer can see it, so if the leaves are falling on it consistently, sometimes I think that's better. That will make him come back and want to keep that scrape more open.
Do you ever feel like you find scrapes that are almost visual based?
Oh,
Like they're in an area that deer can see from a ways away?
100%. Like even when I make a mock scrape, it's always like, it's not so much where are deer traveling, I'm trying to put it right in their nose, although that can work. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people have success literally plopping a mock scrape right on a trail. But I think the best is, especially, you'll have like a thick portion of woods and then it comes to a more open area. And then sometimes you just need that right tree too. Like I would say one of the most attractive ones here, and maybe not the most heavily used, but would be like what they call a witch hazel. I don't know if you have those, but they're like similar to what they call like an umbrella tree. And they don't, usually witch hazels are a little more isolated. If you see one, it sticks out like a sore thumb. You throw a witch hazel on the edge of an opening, especially for a mock scrape, they're running to it. Even if you didn't even make a mock scrape and somehow you planted that witch hazel with all these lower hanging branches, they're going to come right to it. Like they want, and that's what I meant about like when the leaves are falling on scrapes and they want to keep them pot out. They want, it's similar to a rub. It's not that they're just putting scent on it. They're trying to expose it. They're trying to say, hey, look, here I've been ripping it up. A lot of times too, you'll even find a rub on the tree that your scrape is on as well. So the visual to me is just as important as how the deer are finding it with their nose or traveling through. Like they're almost similar to a signpost.
So the way you're talking about witch hazel, which we don't have those down south, but that umbrella effect from the limbs and the overhanging limbs.
Yep.
We have a lot of big beech trees.
Yeah.
And they have those, branches that are 4.5 to 5.5 foot off the ground. They go all the way around it. It's really visual based.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, especially when it comes to mock scrape or just any kind of scrape, talk more of a visual based scrape where deer can see it from a distance and it attracts them based off how it looks, and then of course scent checking it? Do you think having the right structure of licking branches plays a factor, or is it more the visual of the ground?
The licking branch is even more, especially how you hang that branch, like the vertical. Some people don't believe in like hanging a rope or a vertical branch. They think just the overhanging limb, as long as the deer can access it with their preorbital glands and scrape the ground underneath, works. But I'm telling you, I've seen it with my own eyes. I've been hunted scrapes that, especially if you have either, and typically here it would be beech. I heard you say that you guys have beech down your way. Well, why I love, like, for me, my favorite type of licking branch is a beech limb. The only reason why is because I can cut that beech limb and it will hold its leaves for sometimes up to a year. And when you have just a plain branch hanging down and you look at it from 50 yards out, you don't even see it. When you have leaves on that branch, all of a sudden it sticks out like a sore thumb. And the vertical branch, a deer knows that, okay, that branch doesn't grow vertically. That took another deer to go up there and work that and break it enough to where it hangs down. Do I think they do it on purpose to where, like, they break it vertically so every other deer can see it? I don't know about that, but they just know that that's a scrape. They see a vertical branch, that's not normal. So the more leaf, the more visual, the further that the deer can see that, the way more activity you're going to have, for sure.
Now, that goes into making mock scrapes.
Yep.
Do you make mock scrapes? How often? Where? Like, what's your thoughts on mock scrapes?
I'll make mock scrapes year round, but I still think the early spring is the best time to make mock scrapes. I believe that right after winter breaks, there's a lot of movement as far as deer relocating. Winter time, especially up in this area, is generally a time when most of your bucks are holding tight to smaller areas because they're conserving energy. So once the spring breaks, it's almost as if they have like a surge in them to be like, I want to just cover some ground. I've been cooped up all winter. Similar to how one of us might feel that, it up here, sometimes it'll snow for days. You stay in the house and all of a sudden you get that break in the weather and you just want to get out and about. And I think the early spring is best because bucks are starting to roam around. Honestly, they're checking scrapes then. There's such a great amount of movement then that you want to catch those bucks early before they relocate into their summer areas. Because then, once again, summer is similar to winter where they kind of lock back up to an area. So there's a lot of movement from early spring, mid-spring, and then it dies off once you get closer to summer, where you're trying to capitalize that, because if a buck finds that scrape in the early spring, he may not show up to it all summer, but I'm telling you, it's amazing the amount of memory they have with scrapes. Someone will say, well, how do you know that, how do you even tell it's like a certain buck that came by with no antlers in the early spring, but then it was him, in the fall? And like, there's pictures I get of so many different deer that, like, I can literally tell, like, facial features, certain things on their body. And many times I've had a buck hit a scrape, say, like, in March, and that buck never came back till October. But not a doubt in my mind, he remembered that scrape was there. By putting that out so early and giving it, another fact is, like, I don't care where that scrape is, the longer it is out, especially if it's a newly made scrape, the more time that scrape has to intercept new deer and other deer in that area, the more deer are going to get to know it. So, like, you can't make them too early. But yet, if you're going to make mock scrapes, you also got to keep in mind, going into the next season, that, okay, just because I made a mock scrape and some bucks hit it doesn't mean that's where I'm going to kill that deer either. Like, yeah, it works somewhat, but once again, that's going to depend on the habitat in the fall, where that deer beds, food. If it's in the rut, you're going to have to factor does. But sometimes if you can plan it all right, and that's why even right now I've been making a lot of mock scrapes, I'm starting to see the clues of where I need to be in the fall. So if I put those mock scrapes now and maybe catch some of these bucks going in there, especially on these little mini rut excursions, those scrapes can be really good in the fall.
Interesting. Okay. The And I guess the location of a mock scrape, what has to go through your mind to tell you like this is a spot I should put a mock scrape at if I'm not finding a scrape? Like what? Because like we talk about this in podcasts. You don't put a mock scrape where you want deer to be. Scrapes are always where deer are already at and where they're spending time and where they want to go. And I feel like that you have to have the same mindset when you're making a mock scrape. Like you're not making it in a I'm sure y'all have Walmarts up here, but you're not putting it in a Walmart parking lot and having deer attract to it. So it's got to be around deer. But like, what's going through your mind to put a mock scrape in a certain spot?
I mean, honestly, especially right now, although a lot of my work has been done, or a lot of it is just historical because I have so many stinking mock scrapes. I got mock scrapes that are probably 20 some years old. I kid you not. But if I'm making like a new scrape and I'm thinking like, well, where do I want to make this mock scrape? Once again, it's probably going to be based on me trying to predict the upcoming season. I'm usually always thinking for that next year. Now, sometimes my predictions are wrong, but it will still get some use to where maybe it didn't do all that well this coming season, but if I keep it going and certain features within Mother Nature take place maybe 2-3 years down the road, like I guess my point is too, other than scrapes around bedding, I don't see the same consistency every year. Like especially in the rut, I have scrapes where one year is really good, next year not so much. Yeah, once again, always some activity, but they're a little more inconsistent. But going into each season, I'm trying to predict these precise locations. And I will say, not to brag, but so many times I have a spot kind of picked out, and it's amazing how many times there's already a scrape there. It really is.
So I want to ask you this, because this I think is a very important factor. How much does annual patterns play for you when it comes to scraping activity?
It would really just depend on the time of the year. I really pay close attention to early season activity, and that annual pattern is generally consistent, or the late season. I also find that like right after our gun season, bucks are very patternable because they've really locked down. They're spooked. They're worn out from the rut. Where if you can put all the pieces together, if you can have food fairly close, if you can have cover, if it's kind of back in away from any human activity, like you'll find consistencies and where those scrapes are in those areas are getting hit more consistently. But throughout the rut, man, once again, I don't see like annual patterns or it really changes from year to year.
Yeah.
But there's certain parts throughout the season that you could just say, man, every year, almost every year, I'm very confident that that's going to be a good location, or that scrape's going to be used based on the pattern that buck's in that time of year.
And going back to the first episode we did with you, when you say you're trying to predict what they're going to be doing and where they're at that year, that depends on water, mast crop, things of that nature. Can you just recap that really quick?
Yeah. I mean, you could have the best bedding area, or you could have, the greatest remote thicket out in the middle of nowhere, but you start to take away water, you start to take away natural browse, all those other outside factors, and that's not where a buck's going to want to be. He might have used that area for 3 years in a row, but bucks, especially mature bucks, maybe even all bucks, they have a very nomadic sense of when they need to relocate. They don't mind relocating if they have to. However, I just think that especially mature deer are always out there searching for the best of the best. Their survival is always their biggest priority, and when they can find the best food, the best cover, water, all in a certain area, that's when they're going to relocate. So it can definitely change from year to year.
I wanted to talk about actually hunting on the scrapes and setups, things of that nature. So one thing we mentioned earlier is, again, a lot of people think that maybe scrapes aren't productive for actually hunting over the scrape. And we mentioned that one reason for that is maybe they're focused on the wrong scrapes. What are some other factors that go into actually hunting the scrape that makes it productive for you?
Yep. Number one, and maybe this is something you guys might have just hit me on the right day, but this is something that, I've been doing. I probably haven't talked a lot about, but I think calling around scrapes is phenomenal. Keep in mind that I think a buck, especially a mature buck, wants to catch a less dominant buck at that scrape, given the right time of year. And I think that, how do I want to word this? That if he hears another buck at that location, he might not have even, it might not even been on his mind that he was going to go visit that scrape. Maybe he's 200-300 yards out and the conditions were right and he was able to hear your grunting from that far away. Him thinking that that's at that scrape is going to increase the odds of scrape hunting way more than just hoping for something to come in and check it out. Like, I think calling around scrapes, if you're going to call anywhere, if you're the type of hunter that, you have a lot of success calling, you're good at it, I would focus around areas where there's more sign, more scrapes, but places still where a buck is going to feel secure, because you could have a scrape tree out in the middle of a food plot and you could have a ground blind or whatever set up right there, and you could call all you want. That deer is not going to come in and check that out, or just the visual standpoint. But in the right situation, if a buck has to come in physically to check that scrape out and just to check out your calling, that's going to entice him way more. That's at least one of the biggest tricks I have.
I love calling. Love calling.
Yep.
Have success with it in and around areas you're talking about.
Yep.
Are you talking more so in the aspects of grunting around scrapes, or are you talking rattling? What exactly are you talking about when it comes to calling?
For me, and I'm not knocking rattling or bleeding, and maybe I'm just more of a simplistic type guy. Like, I'll be honest with you, I don't pack every gadget in my pack. I throw a grunt call, I'll throw a sandwich, a bottle of water, my knife, and my hunting license, and that's all I need. Everyone's a little bit different, but the amount of success I've had grunting is just unbelievable. And like, it's just amazing, especially in the big woods where you don't have high densities of deer, or it's harder to narrow things down. But being able to reach out there and intercept deer that were never going to pass by you, because the woods are just so big and there's so many travel routes and so many different reasons where they can get around you, calling increases your odds many, many times. And honestly, I've had success from it almost just out of boredom. Like, just because I hunt big woods where it's not uncommon to go a few days sitting all day and not see a deer. So you start to get desperate. You're thinking, what the heck, I might as well grunt or might as well rattle, whatever. And for me, it's been grunting. But I started to realize that, holy cow, like, the more I grunt, the more success I have. And it's actually gotten to the point where some people think I'm crazy, but I don't ever go 5 to 10 minutes without grunting. I grunt constantly. I grunt as loud as I can. I mean, I make it sound normal, and I grunt in all directions. And it's the amount of encounters, like last year, like when I guided, because I didn't have any time to hunt during the best part of the rut because I was guiding archery hunters. But it was around the 10th when I got freed up. And like, most of my hunters, I mean, they were maybe seeing a buck a day or every other day have an encounter. I think that week I hunted, I think I saw like 28 bucks. And I'd say 23, 24 of them were due to grunting. Like, that's what created those encounters. Yeah, I had good setups. I did scouting. I had intel, but like, there was still a lot of area for those deer to be in. And that's what really led to those encounters.
Oh, I love this conversation. Because listen, I'm grunting full. Dude, like last 4 or 5 years, I've changed that and I've grown a lot more and had way more success. And I always say calling is making your own luck.
Yep.
If you put the homework in and you're in the right spot, I feel like that's the one thing that can really turn the tides a little bit for you. As long as you have a realistic grunt call, you know how to use it correctly, and make it sound realistic. And it's in a spot that a buck's going to want to naturally come to. It's like grunting in a food plot or grunting in some wide open timber, probably not the best circumstance.
Yes.
But if you're in around that bedding cover and it's visually a little more obstructed,
Yep.
I feel like that curiosity really can help. So I'm glad you brought that up and
Absolutely.
implementing that around hunting scrapes where a buck's already going to want to come investigate.
Yeah, many times running cameras on scrapes, or especially in video mode, some of the best fights that my cameras ever captured, and even grunting and calling, you name it, were around scrapes. Like, that's a social area. That is a very common place where bucks are going to meet up with each other, and that's literally the spot where they're competing over territory or does. That's where a fight's going to take place.
Now, also, one thing I think that needs to play a big factor, you're talking about calling and hunting around scrapes. How do you like to position the tree that you're going to get in to give you the best opportunity to not only shoot a buck coming to that scrape, but also potentially comes downwind checking that scrape from you calling or just investigating? How do you typically like to set up around a scrape?
Yeah, and that is the biggest challenge of scrape hunting, is your setup, because not only when calling, but all times most bucks eventually will come in downwind of that scrape. He may not have been coming in from a half mile away downwind the whole time, but once he starts to get a little bit closer to it, he'll start hooking downwind, and that is extremely difficult. But where I think you have a little bit of an advantage in the mountains is if you can use the elevation right. And a lot of times, like, if say you're hunting on the narrow part of a ridge, and just the way your setup can be in certain spots, as long as it's not a big flat, usually in most higher elevations in ridge country, you can set up to where most of your scent is probably blowing over that deer coming in. Now, if it's a big flat, or you're down in a bottom, or you're on a bench, it's way harder. There really is nothing you can do. Not say you shouldn't hunt scrapes in those locations, but my best success has been when I found a scrape and hunted a scrape where I had a wind advantage, or maybe there's some obstacle that that there's almost no way a buck can totally come in downwind. But the ultimate way of having success is finding a wind advantage. You can't defeat that deer's nose hunting a scrape.
To me, that's the advantage, though, of hunting scrapes in mountains versus flat land.
Exactly.
Because in flat land, unless you have something, like you said, big down trees, some kind of water that they're absolutely more than likely not crossing,
Yep.
there's nothing keeping from that deer coming from downwind, and there's no height advantage, really. Even though you might be 15, 20 foot up a tree,
Yep.
at some point your scent molecules are hitting the ground.
Exactly.
And if you cross right there, you're busted versus you get some big elevation change, and you can get your scent blown off the steep side, and there's a little bench, there's a little flat spot that scrapes on, he's hooking around it, but he's not coming over that, not quite a bluff, but a really steep spot's really gnarly.
Yep.
You have a little bit more advantage following thermals and everything in that circumstance, correct?
Yep, and that's where, like, there's been times I've been almost afraid to call, because, like, I know if I call here, a buck is going to come in downwind, and I see no way that deer is going to not detect. I have nothing. But then there's been times, like I've said many times, where I just know I got an advantage here, and given the topography and the way my scent cone is going to blow out, I'm pretty confident in most directions he's not going to pick it up, or by the time he picks it up, it might be too late. But I still would say, like, maybe you hunt flat land, or maybe you don't have the topography similar to the mountains. I would rather gamble and just have the encounter. You just never know. What if the wind shifts? What if something happens? Or how can you not want to just see a big deer? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard. I would have a hard time not at least calling some, even if I had not much of an advantage. Once again, I know I touched on there's spots where I hardly call, but, like, I guess I'm saying I don't want to say I wouldn't call at all. And I just want to. I would want listeners to at least still give it a try if they didn't have the terrain and topography that I had, because just getting a buck within sight versus not seeing anything at all, you just never know what will happen.
Well, we've got, for listeners out there and viewers, about the same time that this episode will come out, there's going to be another really good episode on calling coming out the same time frame.
Yeah.
So it's going to be great kind of hand-in-hand conversations here.
Great.
Whether that one came out before or after this episode, but within a couple weeks. Yeah, I love calling. And like what you're talking about, like calling 360 degrees, all that, make it try to sound realistic, where the call fades away from wherever the deer is and kind of gets a little bit louder.
Yep.
Also, when you're talking about setting up and hunting the actual scrape,
Yep.
I'm guessing you're trying to be able to shoot to the scrape.
Yes.
But what else are you taking consideration from a stand setup? I know, trees can be somewhat limited, as in the tree that gives you the best cover and the best situation, but what else are you taking consideration other than wind direction for accessing that tree in that location, but also shot placements?
I think another key factor is, say like, you might want to get, how do I explain this? So where I've run into a problem before is, if I set up, maybe downwind of the scrape, and I'm like directly almost in line with the scrape, many times a buck will just catch you in a tree. Like if it's right within line of the route he's taken, you want to be somewhat offset if you feel you can predict where a buck is going to come in. Because even if he doesn't pick up your scent, I still feel like for some odd reason, some bucks get a little bit vulnerable, like coming into one specific spot. Maybe it's because you got a camera there, they've smelled some human scent, but many times I'll see a buck kind of hesitate. It's not like they're just coming in running to that scrape. They'll take their time, he'll stop, he'll look around. You don't want to be in that visual path either. Like I try to be offset. I think you definitely want to be either up high or in good cover, and especially if you're calling, because ultimately I don't want a buck to even sense that the sound came from 20 feet up a tree, but I still feel like sometimes, if he's not that far out, he might be a little bit hesitant too. If he heard you grunting, that didn't sound right. It's kind of sound near that scrape, and I'm going to check it out. So you always want to be off center, and I wouldn't be. I think you want to extend the shot further than what most hunters would like. Like I think 15 to 20 yards to a scrape is usually too close. I think if you're confident at 40 yards out, I think you're better off setting up 40 yards. That gives you a lot more room to play. Or a situation might be a buck didn't come in downwind until the last 20 yards. Then he does cut in, but it's too late. You got a shot. So I think too many hunters have set up too close to scrapes.
Do you ever find in some of those spots you try to hunt on a scrape where there's that faint trail downwind of the scrape, 15, 20, 30 yards?
Yep.
Do you put that into consideration for setups as well?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we talked about it on the last podcast as far as trail camera setups. For sure, especially there's multiple bucks usually that are always going downwind of that certain scrape. And you will find sometimes not just a faint trail, but an active trail. For instance, you find a pretty active scrape, maybe there's a trail going right through it, but then you look 20, 30 yards out from it and you see another trail paralleling. That's that trail that they're using to scent check that scrape from a distance. And that's probably the route they're going to take coming in. So instead of even maybe being 30 yards from that scrape, I'd be 30 yards from that trail. I would take that chance, because I told you before that more bucks come in and check the scrape without ever standing in it than actually working it. They just come in downwind, give it a whiff, and they're gone. Like that's the situation you want to expect to happen more.
Man, I love this conversation so much. That's exactly what that buck that I was talking about earlier did. He came in and he was coming right towards the scrape, and he got about 50 yards out and he just turned and he started swinging around it.
Yep.
And unfortunately for him, I had a rifle.
Yeah.
So it didn't work out for him. But man, I love this conversation. Another thing about hunting actually on top of a scrape, is there any difference between hunting in the morning versus the evening on scrapes?
Yeah, I mean, one thing too is you always got to keep thermals in mind for morning and evening. Those are your big thermal shifts. I still tend to, maybe I said this already, but just be sure, like if it's early season or late season, generally find more activity around scrapes in the evening than I do the mornings. I think, like I keep saying, bucks within their bedding areas, they come out with a full belly. They're more inclined to check scrapes in the evenings than the mornings. But I think it just depends on time of the year, because I would say in the rut, I have more activity in mornings around scrapes than I do at any other time. I have in the rut, in guiding, hunting, whatever, we generally see the best activity from about 8 a.m. to noon. Like a lot of hunters will tell you 10 to 2. I find, at least up here in the north, I think 8 a.m. to noon is the best for buck movement. I think it's the best to hunt scrapes. It's just the best for everything that time of year.
So GPS data from down in Mississippi, even though it's way further south, agrees with what you just said.
Does it really?
8 to noon, yes. That's what they had for peak buck activity during the rut.
We're getting close to time here, and I just wanted to cover this.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about hunting, like the peak time for hunting scrapes being that pre-rut time frame, say mid to late October. Once you start rolling into late October, again, we're talking Pennsylvania here, so y'all have the traditional November rut. If someone's listening in Alabama with a January rut, you just have to adjust this to where your peak rut dates are.
Yep.
But so like for say around here, once you start getting to Halloween, like you're really starting to get into the rut, how does your scrape hunting activity change as you start rolling into the rut? What do you start doing to adjust?
Yeah, I would say that the primary focus then is not scrapes at all. If I didn't touch on it before, our best scrape period is probably October 15th to October 25th usually. Like that's when any time I would get to hunt, or if I'm putting a client in a spot, you're over a scrape, because that's just, I think that's one of the higher priorities on a buck's agenda, is to be going around that time of year working scrapes. So you have like a 10-day window wherever you are throughout the country where I think, scrape hunting, it should literally be that's all you're doing that time of year. But once we get, more into the rut, the only time I think scrapes are really good are when a buck has recently left a hot doe. I think he'll go back around working scrapes, trying to communicate with does. He'll start throwing his scent down, hoping to interact one way or the other. Or a lot of times too, when you get a hot doe, she will start going to scrapes. And maybe not even a buck has hit that scrape, but she'll start putting her scent maybe 1 to 2 days before she comes into full heat. I think somehow her body will start feeling that, because I've seen it before where all of a sudden this doe is just working this scrape for a couple days very heavily, no bucks, but then 48 hours later, it's just 6 bucks hit it in 3 hours. And that's what you see. And that's because she is putting her scent on that scrape and they caught that. And that, like that'd be a situation if you have a cell cam there, because usually with regular cameras, you miss it because it's a 36 to 40 hour, whatever. It's a 1 or 2 day thing. That's all you got. Once she's done, that scrape can shut right down. But if you can hit it right, especially with a cell cam, which we even did last year, that actually is probably literally, I hate to, some people might disagree, that might be a guaranteed shot opportunity. I kid you not. Like you can't ask for, you've got a hot doe there. Her scent is better than any scent on the market. Every buck in that area is starting to pick up on that. And that is the spot because she keeps going to it. Like doesn't get any better than that.
Dude, that is something that we've just started noticing these last 2 or 3 years in Alabama as we've started using cell cameras. Because also with a traditional camera, I might be flipping through it and I might be like, oh, here's a doe. Oh, there's a buck, and I just, something about getting the information fed to me in real time.
Yep.
But man, if you have a doe that comes up and hits that licking branch, you better go in there.
Yep.
That's what we've noticed.
Well, then she squats, peas in the scrape.
Oh my God.
That happened, was it last year or 2 years ago? The same scrape he's talking about where he shot that buck.
Yeah.
The doe would come in there. I think it was last year. We didn't get a chance to hunt it. And it's like the next 2 days is insane with buck activity.
Yep.
Daylight on that scrape, mature bucks, and then they're gone.
Then it's done.
And
Yeah,
it's
and that was during the rut too. I wouldn't consider when that happened. It wasn't pre-rut for us. It was kind of in the thick of it.
yeah.
Yep.
So
Or not to interrupt you, but I just want to emphasize, like, if you're someone who, is planning to hunt around that situation, you can't hunt intel like that was last week. Like, you might check an SD card and be like, holy cow, literally 4 days ago, this was on fire. I'm going to spend 3 days here. No, you're too late. Like, unless another doe in that area comes into heat and starts working that scrape, there'll be minimal buck activity. And as we get more into the rut where you get to where there's more and more does coming into heat, if you're hunting scrapes, it's all about finding that hot doe scrape. And it's a quick thing. It might be 1 day and you're done. So don't hunt intel at that time of year that's more than a few days old. You are wasting your time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes too with, if you're out in the woods and you see a doe work a scrape, like you need to hunt that thing. Now, have you ever had any situations where you just go out walking, trying to find that scrape, like that hot scrape, boots on the ground, and then capitalize on it?
That's exactly what I do for my clients. Like, that's another huge reason why I'm running close to 200 trail cameras is there's days I'll check 30, 40 of those cameras in 1 day to try and get someone on that spot. In fact, last year, the perfect scenario would be, maybe you guys saw it, but one of the guys from, it's called the Just Hunt Club, John Lewis, he was kind of hunting with me some, also hunting the area on his own, but I was helping him some. And I just, we just got to talking. I said, if it all works out, if I feel when you're coming in this area, if I have something hot, I'll send you in the right direction. And every time he came, I generally had something hot for him. And it got to the point where the last time he came, had a hot doe on a cell cam, and absolute giant honor. That wasn't even the buck he killed. More bucks were pouring into the area, but it was no doubt that was the situation, even though it was a cell cam. But many times also I'll check regular cameras, and there's been times like if a client has cell service, I'm like, get out of your stand right now. Like, you got to get here now based on the intel that I've seen on this camera or what I'm seeing in this area. Sometimes you'll also find where there's a hot doe, there'll be just a small area of just scrapes and fresh sign everywhere. And you'll look in the leaves, especially if the ground is kind of soft, you'll see all this running and trampling where they've been chasing. And that's what you got to get on now, though. You can't be a couple days late on that.
That's the crazy thing about the rut, especially in a big woods area where you just can't see very far, is you can hunt the whole rut and be 200 yards off of that.
Absolutely.
And have the worst rut ever. Whereas if you were right over there on that right ridge point, you'd have the best hunt of your life.
Yep.
We experienced that a couple years ago in Alabama, very, very front end of the rut. As soon as it was getting going, we had a hot doe come through with 5 bucks chasing her at the same time.
Yep.
They were snort wheezing, they were fighting. One of them bred her, and none of them were shooters, and they all left. And not 30 minutes later, here comes a buck. I killed him. We switched. I gave him the camera. He gave me the camera. I gave him the gun. And 30 minutes after that, he killed a buck coming through there. And it was just like, man, you hunt literally for years on end to get a hunt like that. It was just textbook awesome hunt. But that goes to show that in the rut, as you start transitioning into the rut, it's a little bit more of a dynamic situation. Like, you just got to adapt and you got to go find that hot sign. So when you're walking through the woods, like you just said, you're looking for like a area with a high concentration of red hot fresh sign.
Yep.
And that's tells you that you need to be in that area.
That's generally, I would say, at least for us, that's like after like November 4th or 5th. That there's that period where, because you got to watch, because in the pre-rut stages, there's times when bucks are just throwing up a ton of sign. But then usually the sign starts to taper. Because all of a sudden there's more interest in does. A few does are coming into heat. And then you just start to find, as more does come into heat, there's these just pockets of hot sign. And that's, once again, that would be a scenario where, I talked about before, don't don't get too focused on areas with a lot of sign, but that's a situation where there's a hot doe because you got multiple bucks competing over her. They're ripping up scrapes, they're trampling the ground, they're making rubs, like, and you should even smell it. You'll literally smell tarsal in there, you name it. And one thing too, I wanted to touch on that when you brought that point up. I don't mean to go back, but this is another thing I tell my clients. Anytime you have a doe pass by you in the rut, I don't care if she's 100 yards out, it's never a bad move to even set up within bow range of her trail. It's 100% sure you need to move if you think she might be coming into heat. Just because she, didn't have a buck on her then, I can't tell you how many times I've had a client say, yeah, Steve, I had this doe come by 80 yards out, and it was even a few hours later than bucks start pouring in on her trail. And they never, and they would even say like, yeah, Steve, 7 different bucks followed her trail today, and I didn't get a shot at one of them. And that's like, you got to move. I don't even care if you're in a fixed ladder stand, you're better off getting down on the ground and getting on that doe's trail, because that's about as good of a situation you can run into during the rut.
Another question I had, when you're doing the in-season scouting and you're trying to be mobile and you're trying to basically chase the rut and you're trying to find where that action is going on, how do you go about doing that? Or what are your thoughts on doing that in a way where you're not messing up the spot? Because some people might hear that and be like, well, I'm not going to get down and walk all over the woods because that's going to mess up all my spots. I'm going to blow all the deer out. So how do you keep from doing that?
I honestly think in the big woods at that time of year, it doesn't really matter. There's so much movement, or it's so widespread that it's not like you're going into some buck's bedding area and busting them out. I think in these bigger woods, you can get away with doing a ton of boots on the ground just to find that one spot, because especially once you get further into the breeding phase of the rut, if you're not in that ballpark of that hot doe, you're done. You might as well be sitting at home watching TV. So you got to be more aggressive, and you got to put boots on the ground. There's no technology so far they've created that's detecting that hot doe for you everywhere. So you've got to go find it yourself. And that's another thing, like, I think too many hunters focus the rut is always thinking travel routes. Like, it's November 7th. They should be cruising hard today. I'm setting up on this pinch point for 3 days until I kill a giant. Well, if a lot of does are coming into heat in that area, you're in the wrong setup. You got to start being more aggressive. You might only sit half a day, then move. Just keep moving until you find that breeding action that's going on. And then you've got a day or two in that spot, and then you got to move again.
We're on time crunch. We got to wrap up, but I'll say, Steve, we're gonna have to get you back on.
This is not the last time.
And now you got me interested in actually coming to hunt PA. Bo's talked to me for a while.
Dude,
We'd love to have you.
I would love to come hunt up here. Like, just speaking to all my fellow Alabamians out there, this place is cool. It really, really is cool. We drove around the national forest a little bit before we recorded and just looked around, and it's a really beautiful landscape. Habitat up here is unique. You got all the hemlocks all over the place. It's just a different kind of forest than what we're used to in Alabama. Now, that being said, it's also really similar in some ways. Y'all got clear cuts, y'all got power lines and all that stuff. So, it would be just super fun to come up here and hunt sometime. So, how do people get a hold of you if they want to come hunt with you and book a hunt?
Yeah, just find me on Instagram or Facebook, and like I did on the last podcast, it's Sherk's Guide Service. It's not Shrek's. I've had all kinds of different names being called. So Sherk's Guide Service, look it up on Facebook or Instagram and shoot me a message. And like I always say, I throw things out there, not even just in hopes of maybe getting a new client. Like, if I can make someone a better hunter by something I say or inspire someone to hit the woods, that's what I'm all about. So you don't have to just follow me to be a potential client.
Perfect. Steve, thank y'all. Thank you so much for letting us come over and do this podcast, man. It's been fun. Again, enjoying PA, and excited to have you back on at some point in the future. But for all the audience members out there, listeners, viewers, thank y'all for watching and listening. And we'll catch you back here next time on the Southern Outdoorsmen podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.